Thank you to those of you who have been putting your information in the chat. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for setting aside the time to be with us this morning. I am especially excited to be here with you this morning because this is an opportunity for two organizations that I'm part of and really enjoy to work together in tandem to bring you the program this morning. I'm Dr. Tamika Pollins, and I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, Access, and Inclusion for the West Orange Public Schools, and we are part of Kean University's Diversity Council. I have also had the opportunity to take two courses on mediation with the New Jersey Association of Professional Mediators. Both organizations have worked together to create this workshop for you today, and I will serve as the moderator during our time together this morning. At this time, we will have the pleasure of hearing from Bruce Matez, who is the current president of the New Jersey Association of Professional Mediators.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I want to thank Larry Jones and his committee from the New Jersey Association of Professional Mediators for putting this together. I just want to take a couple minutes to tell you about our organization. We are the only professional mediation organization in the state of New Jersey. We have over 200 members, all trained, educated, practicing mediators who do basically any different type of mediation that you can imagine. So I imagine that all of you have issues that come up, disputes that come up in your organizations or your workplace. And mediation is a wonderful way to help people resolve those issues and move forward. And the mediators that we have in the association can help with basically anything. So if you have any interest, if you have any need for a mediator, if you have any interest in mediation in general, we have a website. It's the NJAPM.org. Feel free to log on. You'll have some contact information for all of us at some point today. Feel free to send us an email or reach out to us. And we're always happy to help. And I hope you have a wonderful day. I've seen parts of this presentation previously. It is quite interesting. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for bringing greetings and providing an overview of the association before we move into our first section on unconscious biases and cultural norms in educational environments. I've had the great pleasure of taking a course from each of our first pair of presenters. Marvin Schuldiner is an accredited professional mediator who practices civil, family, and elder mediation. He is a roster member for the New Jersey Superior Court and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He is also a former president of NJAPM and is currently the Civil Mediation Training Director. And also presenting with him this morning for our first session is Anju, Jessani. She founded the Divorce with Dignity Mediation Services in 1997, following a career in financial services. She is an accredited professional mediator with NJAPM and serves on the New Jersey Court's roster of family and divorce mediators. Anju served as NJPM's president from 2005 to 2007. She directs the training in divorce mediation and has offices in Clinton and Hoboken, New Jersey. So we will hear from both of them at this time.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. What I'm about to present is actually has been excerpted from what is normally about a 2-hour presentation, and I have 7 minutes. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly, and we're going to be talking about cognitive biases and obstacles, and how we think can interfere with the decisions that we make. Why is it that we're biased? Well, there are actually many, many reasons why we have biases. And biases generally has a negative connotation, but it actually exists for some good reasons as well. Our minds basically take shortcuts to make decisions. And a lot of that actually goes back to when we were cave people, right? And we had to make some quick decisions about whether life and death decisions. So we might look out of our caves and see an animal, and we have to make a quick decision on, is that a little kitty cat that I can go over and pet, or is that a leopard or a puma that I probably ought to start running very quickly away from. And what developed in human minds are two different ways of making decisions. It's called System 1 or Type 1, and System 2 or Type 2. So Type 1 thinking is when you make those very instantaneous decisions that used to be life or death, but now that system's kind of gotten a little bit hijacked by modern society in ways that probably were never intended by that original system. And unfortunately, in the 20th century, we know enough about these systems that those thinking systems can be manipulated or can be used to manipulate people. And unfortunately, we see that in the world of politics in particular, but in society in general, and marketing, in advertising, and so on. So the Type 2 or System 2 thinking is actually the more thoughtful and effortful one, where you actually go through and you apply some logic to what you're thinking about. And really, that's how you're going to help overcome the biases that we all have. And instead of making those snap decisions, you're going to say, okay, hold on a second, let's think this through a little bit more. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So how many biases do we have? Well, we have a lot of them. And these are the ones only that we know about right now. And they're well over 100 at this point. The behavioral scientists, social scientists, and psychologists have been continuing to do studies and finding more and more of these. But almost all of these are present in every person to some degree, but they can be overcome. So now I would like to give you all a very quick quiz. So Tamika, if you can put that up, or Sarah. Okay, so this is a really, really simple question, okay? Do you consider yourself to be an above average driver, an average driver, or a below average driver? Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. There's about 12 people haven't voted yet. All right. Can we share the results with everybody? All right. So actually, this is even more extreme than what I usually see. So if you know how averages work, right? We have a large enough group here. There were 56 people who voted in this quiz. So well above what's a reasonable sample size. So if you know how averages work, basically what you should see here is that there should be as many above average drivers as there are below average drivers. But in our group here, we had one very courageous person that said they were a below average driver. This is an example of what is called egocentric bias, where you think that you or the things that you do are better than average. Normally, when I ask this question in my 40-hour training, where I have this 2-hour block of time to go through all of this, the question we often ask is your child above average? And almost everybody raises their hand. I can't even remember a single person who did not raise their hand when trying to describe their own child as being above average. So, how does this play out in in the real world? Well, I mean, you're dealing with employees, right? You're dealing with parents, and every one of those parents thinks their child is above average, right? So that can pose a little bit of a problem as you're trying to do your jobs, and going through your daily issues. I know the last slide I showed had hundreds of them. This is a slide that focuses a little bit more on the more common ones that I see in the interactions that I have as a mediator or with other people. And I just want to focus on a few of them. So So I already talked about egocentric bias. Kind of a little bit related to that is something called the endowment effect. The endowment effect is where you place more value on something that you own or that you control than what maybe other people have. And that's often presents a difficulty in getting to a solution because people overvalue what they have, whether it's their kids, their job, whatever it might be. You tend to see that. Confirmation bias. As a mediator, this is one of the things that we spend a lot of time trying to overcome. People exhibit confirmation bias, and we see this so prevalent now in our society and our civilization. And what confirmation bias is where you give overweight to information that agrees with your preconceived notions, and you completely dismiss things that go against your preconceived notions. So the whole concept of fake news, that is completely confirmation bias, where people are just completely ignoring, let's say, scientific fact or other evidences that are out there for them to really be open-minded about, but they're not, right? Another one here on this slide is the status quo bias. So people don't like change, right? I think that's true of all of us. But think about it from the people that you're dealing with, whether it's a teacher or a parent, right? They don't like when things change. They don't like things when change for their children, for their job situation. So people get kind of stuck there. And then the last one I'll highlight here is the bandwagon effect. And this is where people overweight things because other people are doing it. And maybe this will manifest itself in your dealings with parents. Oh, well, this other one got this other child got this. How come my kid can't, right? So you may tend to see it there. So how do all of these end up manifesting themselves in your day-to-day dealings, right? So it might show up as poor communications. It might result in arguments that you might have with other people. Certainly poor decision-making will feed into this. It does lead to biased thinking. And overvaluing things that people already have, right? I talked about that a little bit. People will also make improper or wrong moral judgments, and this is called the fundamental attribution error. And what that means is I made the decision because it made a lot of sense, but if you made the same decision that goes against it, you're doing it out of ill intent. That's called the fundamental attribution error, and again, we all show these. People also tend to be very risk or loss averse. I think this also goes back to when we were cave people, and if you lost the food that you had, it wasn't like you could go down to ShopRite or Whole Foods and get more very easily. You might go through a period of starvation. So we didn't want to lose those things we have, because otherwise you might not live. But that still continues into this day, where people are very risk and loss averse. How do we counteract these? Well, a number of different ways. Be self-aware. I like to use there was an example, there was a study that a couple of college professors had done in the aughts, we'll call it the aughts, looking at NBA referees and whether NBA referees called more fouls against out-group members than they did on in-group members. Meaning, so if you had a white referee, were they calling more fouls on black players than white players? And similarly, if you had black referees, were they calling more fouls on white players than black players? And it turned out that was true. And after the NBA said, no, we don't have a problem, no, this is not really true, they let these professors present this evidence to all of the referees before the next season started. At the end of that season, they went and redid the same study, and they found that the out-group bias had completely disappeared. So just by making the referees more aware that they were having, that's an implicit kind of bias, that they were exhibiting that, just by letting them know that, it made them more self-aware, and they exhibited less of that. What can you do? Well, ask also lots of questions. The more facts you gather, the better decisions you're going to be able to make. One of the things that we do as mediators is we will give subtle opinions. I tell my students the best way to do that is to basically ask more questions, maybe with some pointed tone in your voice. But just ask those questions, and that way you're kind of getting subtle opinions across. A lot of what we do as mediators is planting seeds in people's heads. You're not going to be able to convince somebody to change their mind instantaneously, but if you spend some time planting seeds, that may get people to look at things a little bit differently. And one thing most people don't realize is that we as mediators, we are trying to convince people to do things that they don't want to do. But it has to be of their own volition. So those are some of the things that we do as mediators to try and get people to change their mind. You can also help people focus on shared goals and outcomes, right? Well, we're all here trying to do the same thing for your child, right? That's what we're trying to do. And what is the outcome, and what are the different paths you can get there? Focus on the future, right? You can do a lot of blame work on what happened in the past. I've yet to be able to figure out how to change anything in my past. So just look to the future and focus on gains. Like what can we try and do? What have we agreed upon so far? How can we move that into the future? Sometimes apologies are appropriate, but do it appropriately. The worst apology you can give is, "I'm sorry you feel that way," right? So I actually spend 20 or 30 minutes in my course on this. I got about 5 seconds to do it. So, but apologies can be really, really powerful for people. Brainstorming is often a good way of counteracting bias and to lessen conflict. Let everybody have some ownership into the solutions, right? So if you can brainstorm those solutions, it gives the other side some ownership into what's going on. And it may elicit an idea that you may not have thought of to begin with. And then finally, be open-minded, right? Remember, you have confirmation bias too. The way to overcome that is to try and be open-minded and say, okay, maybe this person is right. Maybe their facts are correct. Try and go there. Sometimes it's really, really hard. That's what cognitive dissonance is, holding two different competing thoughts in your head at the same time. But we are capable of overcoming all of this. That's all I have. I'm going to turn it over to Anju now.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm talking about cultural norms in an educational environment. And for any of you who have changed schools as a student, moved from another country, I think we know that every school has a different culture. And then when you're dealing with parents or students who are immigrants, you are dealing with different expectations. Before I do this, I want to show a very brief video on biases that will build on what Marv said in his introduction to my presentation.
We all have implicit bias. These unconscious biases that we carry are influenced by our life experiences and the messages we are given, either intentionally or unintentionally, about ourselves and others. These messages are unconscious because they are not at the forefront of our thoughts. They're stored in the amygdala, a small portion of the brain with the primary purpose of protecting us from danger. If I'm walking to my car at night and I see someone approaching, my amygdala is going to react quickly to try to assess how safe I am. Our brain places people into categories based on outward appearances, and those stereotypes allow our amygdala to quickly size up our situation. We're using stored information from life experiences, but those stereotypes are not always accurate. This is not limited to dangerous situations. At work, we might react to people differently without even thinking about how our stereotypes might be influencing our actions. To overcome these biases and limit their impact, we should try to pay attention to the judgments and perceptions we have about people. We can add new information to our brain's memory by interacting with different groups of people, be open to sharing, and be patient with ourselves and others. We all have implicit biases. That's just the way our brain works. By making an effort to notice when our biases influence our unconscious judgments of others, we can strive to minimize the impact our biases have on our beliefs and actions.
So I think that's a terrific video. And if anyone wants the link to it, I will do that. So we talked before about all these different expectations in an educational environment. And so these norms in terms of educational requirements, expectations differ from country to country. I have an example that in Japan, it's very normal for parents and teachers to hang out till midnight, enjoying karaoke and drinks. I think that would make the front page of the New York Post if that was the norm in the United States. In Nordic countries, first names are the standard for teacher and student communication. Clearly, in the United States, we're talking about usually Mr. and Mrs. or Dr. So there is kind of this different formality or informality in these different countries. So what's the norm in United States education? The first is that we have self-centered pedagogies. So we'll ask a child, what's your favorite color? What's your opinion? In most Asian countries, no one cares what the child feels or thinks. So, you know, if you have parents from other cultures, they may be curious why you're asking these questions. Then there's the idea of top-down individualism. Every student is their own island. You know, we have individual IEPs, self-learning. In most Asian countries, they're standardized. Everything is standardized and structured. And your Asian parent may have a hard time understanding why you're focusing on the individual. And then we have this idea of defragmentation, where there really is a lack of common history and culture. If you're in the South, every adult is called ma'am or sir. There is that common culture. I mean, especially in New Jersey, where we have one of the most diverse, demographics, that's less the case. So we have these culture gaps in our school, and oftentimes the parents don't understand the American norms. For instance, I give the example of a Latino father who's having a parent-teacher conference, and the teacher's talking about how the child is speaking up and expressing herself. The parent is concerned that the child is not being a good student because of this speaking out. He wants to know, how is she doing? You know, is she talking too much? So the perception is that what might be good in an American culture may not be the same for someone from an immigrant orientation. So there really are no simple solutions. One of the things that I'm reading about is understanding that we may be grading someone, for instance, on class participation. But class participation may not be the norm for some cultures. Or we may be doing a evaluation of presentations where we're looking for eye contact, but eye contact may not be perceived as a good thing among some cultures. So we have to understand our expectation of the student and realize that the differences in these cultures, especially when we're dealing with a very diverse school system with a lot of immigrants and first-generation students, there may be really a culture gap between the students and the teachers, not to mention all the different service providers along the line. So I think that if you look in the booklet we've given you, there's some great articles on this. And I think my goal would be that one raises awareness that we are not all coming from the same culture, and there are these culture gaps between all these different groups, parents and students, parents and administrators, and even between parents and other parents. And I'm going to leave it that one of the things that surprises most foreigners most about American school systems is the emphasis on sports, things like prom, and really the idea of learning is fun. There was a recent article in the New York Times about the Russian math tutoring. And one of the complaints the Russian parents were saying about the American school system is that life is not about fun and what's easy. So if you're in a classroom and you're doing teaching where there may be puzzles or people working together, this is really, really antithetical to some cultures. Learning isn't about fun for them. So thank you so much. And I'd like to answer more about this when we have the question and answers.
Thank you so much to you both for getting us started with our session. You know, as you were speaking, Anju, I was thinking about in the video where it ended kind of with the, be open to sharing and be patient. And that really is the key to understanding so many, cultural norms and being able to gain understanding. And I'm excited about the slide that you showed, Marv, with all of the different biases and, what they're specifically called, because I can see myself over the next couple of weeks taking a look at that and everything that I experience or see, really putting it in a specific category to see how I can work with, colleagues and peers more as we do this work. So thank you both so much for providing us with a little bit of information to get us started this morning. One thing that I did forget to share in the beginning was that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will make sure that I keep checking the chat for questions, because we're going to have the actual question and answer portion at the end of this session. So thank you so much to Anju and Marv, and we are going to move into our next session, our next set of presenters who will be presenting on cultural competency, disabilities, and special education issues. And those two presenters will be Joni Mental Health Consortium. And Lawrence Jones is a former New Jersey Superior Court judge and the chair of NJAPM's Committee on Diversity, Inclusion, and Cultural Competency. So at this time, we will hear from Joni and Larry.
Thank you, Dr. Pollins. Cultural competency in autism spectrum disorders is really being aware of the common traits that are associated with the disorder and knowing that such traits will vary from person to person. It's also about being aware that such traits can be seen in families because there is a genetic link. So you may be dealing with some parents that don't even know that they carry these traits. And it's not uncommon to also see this in coworkers and other staff members. The competency also includes being aware that you can possibly be underdiagnosed. And two of the most common underdiagnoses include obsessive compulsive disorder and also ADHD. The cultural sensitivity part of that is being aware of your own biases, because many times we might see people that know somebody with a disorder and they're going back and they're reflecting on that particular situation. So it's really about learning how the disorder impacts the associated persons. So let's talk about some of the traits. So that could be misunderstood. So one of the most common traits you might see is that there's a lack of eye contact. It might be just like fleeting all over the place. Many persons with ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, is literal translation. So they may be misunderstanding what is said just based on that tendency to look at things literally. Attention to detail. So you might be shocked that somebody's like focusing on something that you would not even think of, because attention to detail is another common trait. And of course, like I mentioned, you might see some of that OCD. You might see perseverative thoughts. So if somebody's still thinking about a subject that you talked about, it might be difficult for them to move on because they just not comfortable with closing out that previous thought. You might see a lot of anger responses, because in autism spectrum disorder, a lot of the challenges come with associating the emotion to the feeling. So somebody can feel frustrated, they can feel anxious, and everything comes out as anger. So understand those anger responses can be associated with different types of emotion. And, they might even be sad, but it comes out as anger. So another common trait is a lack of humor. So they might not understand if you're trying to throw some humor in there, they just might totally not get that. Also, common trait will involve sensory integration dysfunction. So you might see this sensory processing deficit where they're trying to integrate. So you might see an individual that has an ability to sit still, and they might be craving that sensory input. So they might be, tapping their foot or taking a pen or a pencil and tapping it. And they're not trying to be disruptive. They're just trying to integrate themselves. And sometimes even the clothes that they wear, if you see them like really fidgeting with their clothes, it could be uncomfortable for them. And the same thing with the environment, like if it's too hot or too cold, or if they have hypersensitive hearing and you have fluorescent lights and there's buzzing and there's background, all these things can be very distracting. You might see a person that lacks empathy. And it's not that they're this like, insensitive person. It's just part of that disorder. They might have a flat affect, and they might misinterpret your facial expressions and gestures. And you might even see that there is a challenge with spatial awareness. So they might be bumping into, somebody or something, or too close to somebody. And again, all traits of the disorder. So let's talk very quickly about some strategies. And this is where, restorative justice, fits right in, because one of the biggest thing is to be patient. People with ASD, they might have difficulty with the social cues and processing information, especially where there's any type of conflict. And just as in restorative justice, really promotes that effective listening. One of the things I want to talk about effective listening, because effective listening isn't just about giving a person the opportunity to talk where you're not interrupting them. It's about what's going on with your thoughts. So how many times do they say something, it triggers a thought, you don't want to, forget to bring that up because it's very important. You stop listening to what they're saying. So a very good strategy to this is just simply have a pen and paper, on down, where you can just jot your thought down and go back to being an effective listener, and then going back to what your notes are to, reflect upon those thoughts. Clear and concise communication. So important to avoid any type of sarcasm, because, an effective individual just might not understand that, and try to avoid vague communication. Offer choices, because I know that, people are to come up with their own solutions, but this can help an individual with autism spectrum disorder gain the control, because they may not be able to pull different choices out of their brain, but then they can sit there and they can reflect on the choices that you gave. Sometimes visual aids are very important. So it helps set the structure when you want to talk about the time, what you're going to talk about. Let them know exactly in advance what this meeting is going to be about. Give them the extra time to process. Avoid physical touch, because, you might do a gentle tap, but that might not be the same sensory feeling that they're having. And utilize your resources. So if you have, a therapist or somebody familiar, if that's necessary, think about those things. Larry?
Yes, thank you. Good morning to everyone. As administrators and principals and leaders in your school community, you are all in a unique position to effectuate change from the top down in terms of mindsets, in terms of positional effects, which people take in terms of how you're going to approach a problem. Joni referenced restorative justice, and Anju and Marv had referenced cultural competency, and these two things go together. It's like if you're going to bake a cake and you only have half the ingredients, that cake might not come out as tasty as it would if in fact you had everything. And these two concepts have to work hand in hand. And when you're talking about special needs, that's a third ingredient. So the real goal is to try to merge restorative justice concepts, cultural competency concepts, and special need concepts when you're dealing with children with special needs. Joni referenced children on the autism spectrum, and their children obviously with other developmental disabilities. And these disabilities are very often social or highly social challenges in nature, autism in particular. It's not just academics, it's social, especially for children who are in junior high school or high school. They're going into, they're hitting puberty, adolescence. They have to deal with all types of issues with other children, with teachers. They could be misunderstood. So even if they're doing very well academically, it's a social disorder. That has to be kept in mind. So when you think about how to approach this from the top down, outside the box, and to trickle it down to faculty, to aides, to students, to parents, it becomes important to think, how do these things blend together? So when you talk about restorative justice, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit towards the end of the program as well, but it's important basically to think outside the box as far as that's concerned. We know that there is a pilot program taking place in New Jersey involving 14 public school districts. It's a 3-year program. We are hopeful that as a result of that program, that more schools will become involved in terms of mindsets as to how to implement that. And there is a relationship between restorative justice and the potential for benefits with restorative justice in the context of developmental disabilities. Restorative justice focuses on repairing harm and building relationships, not punishment. And like anyone, a student with autism may be on either end of a behavioral issue. They could be perhaps allegedly acting out in an inappropriate way, or the reverse. They could be the target of inappropriate behavior by some of their peers. So restorative justice brings together those harmed and those responsible for the harm, and sort of replaces the old model of zero tolerance, which might not be particularly effective, especially with dealing with a child with autism spectrum disorder who may not really understand what is going on in every instance socially, and may feel that they're not fitting in no matter what efforts the school is taking to address the situation. And in the materials that you either have received or will be receiving, the downloadable materials, on page 29, we've attached the entire pilot program application and what's intended by the pilot program. So those schools who are not involved in the pilot program can still read it through and see what the spirit of the program is, talking about things like, for example, restorative circles, mediation, student or community court conferencing, etc. And this can all apply to some degree when you're talking about special needs. In the mediation field, the concept of mediation is not that radically different from the concept of restorative justice. There's a commonality of approach. You're bringing people together to try to problem solve in a constructive, positive way, in a healing way, where there's an enhancement of understanding between each side, so you don't have a situation where there's a repeat situation or an increased intensity of the situation. And that's exactly what takes place in mediation. They're very, very similar. So for example, if you have a child with special needs and you have a child study team or an IEP team involving teachers, involving parents, involving counselors or therapists who focus on speech or OT, or the social issues which involve psychologists, it's important to at least consider, when you're formulating an IEP, to build restorative justice concepts into the IEP, especially for children who are on the spectrum, who are in junior high school or high school, and may be facing social issues that go way outside whatever the academic curriculum may be. How do you address confrontations and altercations? Will there be a restorative justice aspect to the approach you're taking with the child? In the materials, or in the I guess the flyer that was sent out to everybody, we talked about things like avoiding crisis, promoting general greater productivity, increasing student, parent, and employer, meaning teachers, faculty, administrators, satisfaction and productivity. This all relates to, it all comes down to, is the child progressing? So if you have a child with special needs, if you have a child who may be doing, separate from academic issues, may be doing perhaps less than what is hoped for socially, which is such a critical component of a child's growth going through the school system. If you're going to hope for mainstreaming, you're going to hope for a successful career as an adult for the child, because they're going to have to really deal in a world that is mainstream to some degree. It's important to consider how these concepts can blend together, the cultural competency as well as the restorative justice. If you are trying to mediate or trying to resolve a dispute between two people using just restorative justice, but not the cultural competency aspect of it, it can cripple the process. To bring two people together from two different cultures, and if you have a disability, a developmental disability that is cultural in a way, you have to understand that people, for example, on the autism spectrum, there is a culture. There are certain commonalities of approaches, even though every child is different, that need to be considered in the process of effectuating a successful restorative justice program. And we can talk about that a little bit more as in our question and answer period. Okay, Dr. Collins, we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you both. What jumped out to me most was the piece on effective listening, because I think, when it comes to mediating any situation, and as educators, whether it's been, two kids on the playground, or, two parents in your office, or whatever the situation may be, we've had to mediate in some sort of way, and have to model for people what active listening looks like to bring people to a resolve. And when Larry was talking about the restorative justice, it made me think about how important it is really to be well versed in this work, so that we can bring people together for understanding and resolve. Because what happens is, most people want to be understood and heard. And if they don't feel understood or heard, then they're not going to work together in the collective process to make things better. Thank you both so much for your presentation and providing information. We will move on to our third set of presenters. Cultural competency, bullying, and cyberbullying will be presented to us by Dr. Kean Neumann and Felicia Farber. Dr. Kean Neumann has been working as a child psychologist, a family and divorce mediator, and a parent coordinator for over 40 years. Felicia Farber is an attorney in New Jersey and New York who regularly speaks and writes on the social, emotional, and legal ramifications of the common teen behaviors of cyberbullying and sexting. She is the author of the contemporary young adult novel Ice Queen, which spotlights these critical topics and has won 11 awards, including first place for Best Young Adult Novel. Congratulations, Felicia. Felicia is a professional mediator and arbitrator for state and federal courts, as well as several national dispute resolution panels. She serves on the New Jersey Supreme Court Committee on Complementary Dispute Resolution and holds leadership positions in multiple professional organizations. So we look forward to hearing from both of you, Ken and Felicia.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for coming. And I want to talk about bullying, and we need to understand what bullying is. Bullying is a form of aggressive behavior that someone intentionally and repeatedly causes another person to experience injury or discomfort. Bullying takes the form of physical contact, words, or subtle actions. Bullies have the tendency to make fun of people based on their appearance, behavior, race, religion, social status, also their school popularity status. A very key thing in school, certainly, and sexual identity. Bullies induce shame and humiliation in others by intuitively recognizing a person's insecurities and attacking them. Bullies like to be in control of others, fixated on themselves, have poor social and emotional skills, and are very insecure. We learn this from interviews with many bullies, certainly. The words bully and bullying have a negative meaning in today's society. In the past, this wasn't the case, but we don't have time to talk about that now when the switchover took place. Bullying is associated with such terms as abuse, violence, coercion, and intimidation. Bullying has evolved into a widespread issue in the United States, impacting the youth, starting from elementary school to high school. It's become a frequent discipline and public health problem, as it happens daily. Kids from the young age of 5 experience bullying in academic institutions, as I'm sure you're all aware. The Center for Disease and Control Prevention reports that 1 in 5 high school students report being bullied on school property. 40% of students who identify as LGBTQ have experienced bullying more regularly than their heterosexual counterparts. The National Center for Educational Statistics reported that 22% of students from the ages of 12 to 18 experience being bullied. We have a really widespread problem here. It all of a sudden has become more prevalent as the effects of this become clear. Bullying can be prevented. It's not an inherent trait that can't be prevented. It can be prevented. The first step in handling this dilemma is to understand bullying and address the factors that put kids at risk for bullying. School administrators have a key role in this, as all adults really do. And what do you do if you see bullying on the street? Do you intervene? I'm someone who sees myself as a mandated reporter and intervener. And if I see bullying, I will actually step in myself. On the with kids I don't really know. We need to implement lines of communication with kids so that kids can feel comfortable in consulting advice in getting advice from adults. We have to have open communications. Adults, of course, serve as role models, which will influence kids to exemplify that in their lives when it comes to bullying. If you see your parents doing bullying, you're going to become a bully also, and we recognize that this is the case. We need to encourage kids to avoid bullying, be assertive, and treat others with kindness and respect. Schools and educational institutions are designated to provide learning spaces and environments for students. Schools are in the position to promote healthy relationships and intervene in bullying situations. To stop bullying from happening in these learning spaces, it's important to have the participation of families, schools, communities, healthcare workers, social media networks, government agencies, etc. We all need to be involved in this, but schools certainly give us a frontline place to do all this. By working together, we can tackle bullying from all corners and dissolve it. School administrators can opt for professional development of their staff, which will increase teachers' willingness to intervene in bullying situations. Teachers and students do not know how to intervene effectively, and this just increases the problems. School administrators should recognize symptoms of bullying, assist in a consistent, evidence-based training. And I don't know what trainings are involved in. Perhaps we can develop some here at NJAPM and work with school districts on this. We need to become familiar with laws related to bullying and how to deal with these situations. We need to increase supervision in all areas, organize bullying awareness with guest speakers and activities addressing the situation. Families can participate as well, and parenting skills program to maintain this. Communities can organize educational seminars on bullying and family dynamics. Governments and social media networks can provide funding. There's so much we can do. And we're only beginning, and I mean only beginning. Felicia is now going to be speaking particularly about a very prominent new form of bullying, namely cyberbullying. And hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions on this. We have limited time, all of us, in terms of our presentations, and so we want to leave time for questions. Felicia, I look forward to hearing about cyberbullying in particular.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neumann. You laid the perfect foundation for my presentation. Cyberbullying is the electronic cousin of bullying. It's bullying in the digital space, harassing, intimidating, and ridiculing others on the internet, cell phones, and electronic devices. As an attorney, the author of a book on teen cyberbullying and sexting, and as a mom, I've done a lot of research on cyberbullying victimization, and I'm extremely alarmed by how prevalent it is and its severe impact on students. My hope in speaking with you today is for schools and communities to prioritize increasing the levels of awareness of cyberbullying, prioritizing education and training of teachers, administrators, parents, and students to prevent and combat cyberbullying, and to provide students support for those who've been targeted, as well as those who are the offenders. This morning, in the short time I have, I'm going to focus on raising awareness of cyberbullying in the context of cultural competency. In the materials I've provided, there's a sheet entitled "What School Administrators, Educators, and Parents Need to Know About Teenage Digital Behavior" that spotlights some of the important issues to be aware of about cyberbullying and sexting. I also gave you an excerpt from my novel Ice Queen that's been used for summer reading, peer leadership training, and it's gotten great feedback from teenagers. If you'd like to see some of those testimonials from students in my book trailer, it's on my website, which is my name, FeliciaFarber.com. When I speak to teachers at schools, book clubs, book fairs, personally, they tell me the worst cyberbullying happens late at night. Kids are afraid to come to school the next day. They're hurt or humiliated, and they're afraid of face-to-face confrontations. It reminds me of the movie The Night at the Museum, when everyone is quiet and well-behaved during the day, and then at night they come alive and start causing trouble. Parents see their children on these devices, but they don't know what they're doing. So you have kids who aren't being monitored, and they think that they can say and do whatever they want without fear of real life repercussions. But the problem we know is that there are real life repercussions. There's a darker side to technology use. In a nationwide study among 5,400 US teens, 64% of cyberbullying victims said it really affected their ability to learn and feel safe at school. According to a recent Google survey, teachers report that cyberbullying is the #1 safety concern in their classrooms. 2 decades ago, cyberbullying didn't exist, but technology has permeated our lives and it's transformed our culture. So children are using modern technologies at a very young age. The average first age of cell phone ownership is 10. Here is a poll that we would just like you to take quickly. 2 quick questions. 1, does your district teach students how to be safe online? And the second, do you think cyberbullying should be resolved among parents and school officials or through the criminal process? All right, results are coming in. Okay, so we have 46% of the answers. 47 said yes, your district teaches students how to be safe online. 4% said no. And 49% said yes, but it could do more. And so, we recognize that every district has anti-bullying policies in place. And with respect to cyberbullying, the question is, can more be done? And about half of you have responded yes. Okay, so second question, do you think cyberbullying should be resolved among parents and school officials or through the criminal process? And 60% have said parents and schools, and 40% through the criminal justice system. And we'll talk about that more in our roundtable. I just shared the results, so I hope that you can see those. Okay, so 95% of teens say that they have a smartphone or access to one, and 70% have phones by age 12. Keep in mind, 20% have phones by age 8. So these kids live on social media, chat rooms, gaming, emails, apps, text messaging. They're all an integral part of their daily habits. And they don't fully understand the dangers that lurk online and the consequences of their digital actions. In the last decade, cyberbullying rates have tripled, and they're on the rise every year. There's a 40% increase in incidents of cyberbullying since the start of the pandemic. In that first month alone of lockdown, which was March 2020, there was a 70% increase in cyberbullying. And it isn't just a problem in the US, it's a global phenomenon. A Microsoft study found that there's online bullying in children from 8 to 17 across the world. The top 3 countries parents report with the most cyberbullying are India, Brazil, and then the United States. All right, I'm going to share screen with you and get into cyberbullying statistics a bit more. All right, hopefully you can see my screen now. All right, cyberbullying comes in many shapes and forms. Over half of teens who experience cyberbullying have said it was in the form of offensive name calling and hurtful posts. 70% said it was rumors spread about them. 25% received unwanted sexually explicit images. There's also threats, offensive jokes, embarrassing comments, gossip, identity theft. Teenagers are the most common victims of cyberbullying attacks. Most children are exposed to cyberbullying before their 11th birthday, and it peaks around ages 14 and 15. 59% of teens have been bullied or harassed online. 61% of the time, it's because of their physical appearance. The other reason kids are cyberbullied are because of their intelligence, race, sexuality, financial status, and their religion. 59% say it's a problem for people their age. And a McAfee study found that 87% of teens observed cyberbullying. And just observing the bullying can also have a detrimental impact on students. All right, the most common targets for online bullies are children, females, and people with non-traditional sexual orientations. 1 out of 5 high school girls with different colors get cyberbullied. Multiracial females have the highest risk of being victims of cyberbullying. You can see from the top, girls are somewhat more likely to be victims of cyberbullying than boys in this recent study by the Cyberbullying Research Center, but other older studies like Pew Research show that 36% of girls are cyberbullied versus boys. But no matter what study you find, it's always that the females are more victimized than the males. The most significant psychological impacts for female victims of cyberbullying are feeling powerless, loss of sleep, and lower self-esteem. And over 3 times as many females compared to males have seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. LGBTQ community is a constant victim of online harassment. 42% of LGBTQ youth experienced cyberbullying. The rate of cyberbullying victimization among LGBTQ youth was 50% higher than that of non-LGBTQ youth. Also, they're the victims of hate speech, online threats, and over 35% of transgender teens have reported being cyberbullied. Children with different disabilities are a frequent target for cyberbullies. They're ridiculed 75% of the time for their physical defects and 52% of the time for their learning problems. Social media and chat platforms are the perfect environment for cyberbullying. They're unregulated spaces that children and young adults are using for long periods of time. 85% of teenagers use social media, and they're on multiple social networks, and they have multiple profiles. In a worldwide study of over 20,000 parents asking about high-risk online platforms, 65% singled out cyberbullying and social media as their biggest fear. All right, you can see kids are bullied more on Instagram than any other platform. And I don't have much time, so these slides are all in your materials, and I'm just pulling out some highlights of them. Studies have shown that there's a strong correlation between gaming and bullying. Gamers were twice as likely to bully others or to be bullied. Gamers were also far more likely than non-gamers to be if you look, to be the victims at school, and also to be bullied online as well. So, that covers both. And if you don't think gaming is important, I'll just point out that Twitch, one of the biggest gaming sites in the world, has over 1 billion visitors a month. All right. Also, there's a correlation between the number of hours of play and gaming and bullying. Students who reported playing less than 2 hours a day were significantly less likely than those who played more to have cyberbullied others. All right, my last slide is on mental health issues. Students who experience cyberbullying are more likely to have trouble adjusting to school and more likely to have behavior problems and mental health issues like increased stress, depression, anxiety, anger, low self-esteem, self-harm, eating disorders. This psychological harm can lead to school violence, school avoidance, and potentially suicide. Adolescents who experience cyberbullying victimization were more than twice as likely to have depressive symptoms and to trigger suicidal thoughts. All right, I think I'm out of time here. As I said, these are all in your materials and happy to answer more questions or go into all of this further on our roundtable discussion coming up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you both for providing us with some information this morning. As I was listening, I was just thinking about, the importance of the root cause of behavior in general. When kids are the ones who are, doing the bullying type behaviors, like why is that happening? And thinking about more supports that we can give to students who are, victims of being bullied. And the multifaceted approach that we need to take to mitigating this and all the people that we need to have involved to, resolve this beyond, just the school building. And of course, I'm going to date myself when I think about how, when I was in school many moons ago, this connection between the cyberbullying and the phones, when I was little, of course, we had the rotary phone in the house. We didn't have that situation where the kids now have the phone in their hand all day, all night into the evening. Sometimes kids are, on their phone until 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, whether it's playing a game or, their parents think they're asleep or what's happening, that, the bullying spills into, the evening time and away from school where, when I was younger, if there happened to have been an issue during school, that's where it stayed. It didn't, affect you at home because no one was texting you, at home and saying things or putting things on Instagram and the things of that nature. And I'm always blown away, how I hear about kids earlier and earlier and earlier getting phones, to the tune of, age 8. And I completely get that we're living in a different, day and time. So we are reacting and acting of a different day and time with, all the things that are happening in the world and parents wanting to have access to their child. But, how are we all playing a part in really taking a look at how that device is being used when it's being weaponized in the form of bullying? So I want to thank you both for providing us with some information. We have gotten to the point where we're going to do a little Q&A, and I've seen that some things have been going on in the chat already where people have been asking questions and some are being answered. But one I want to make sure that I revisit was a question about how can we address those cultural gaps and mitigate their effects on our practice? So I believe the question came in when Anju maybe was presenting. What are some activities we can engage in to reveal our own cultural gaps and how they are reflected in our practice? And I think you put in the chat the link to the Harvard study.
The Harvard implicit bias test. And these tests have many variables. You can test for age, for race, for skin color, for religion. So this is a way of creating self-awareness of our own implicit biases so that we can then be mindful as we approach people who are different from us.
Thank you. Then we have a question in the chat regarding restorative practices. And I know, Larry, when you were speaking, you brought up restorative practices and restorative justice. And what came into the chat was identifying that this individual was in a district 8 years ago, and the district, as many districts do, right? You put time and money into different programs. And they put a lot of money into restorative practice, train teachers, and it boiled down to doing a lot of circles. And this individual was one of the teachers who went to the 4-day training for staff, and that was the extent of the restorative practice in their district, was doing these, I guess, restorative circles, I believe is what they're saying. and teachers were turned off to it. Do you have any tools or tips on how to make sure training is effective and whole for restorative practices to make sure that it is effective and lasting?
It's like anything else in not only education, but any other profession. It's what each individual brings to it. So for example, if you could have two teachers teaching the same exact course, let's say history, and one of them is really connecting with the students. They're taking information they learned when they were getting their degree in education, and then bringing their own individual strengths into the room so that they connect socially and in other ways with the students and inspire them and connect with them. And then you could have another teacher who is like a robot, who is just reciting whatever they've learned from a history book or a video, and there is no connection whatsoever with the students. So an opportunity to really encourage and build the student is lost in the delivery. So it's the same thing with restorative justice. I see in the quote, in the question, that it says it basically boiled down to circles. So a lot of times when you hear about restorative justice, there's a training in restorative justice, you hear about things like restorative circles. That is a component of restorative justice. It's a tool that a good, inspiring leader, a teacher or administrator or a counselor can use as a format, as a starting point to try to connect with the individuals who are at the heart of a dispute. If they're two students, or if it's a student teacher or teacher, whatever it may be. If you're just robotically sitting in a circle and saying, now it's your turn, now it's your turn, there's a lost opportunity. It will be ineffective. It's a matter of using the restorative circle tool as one component, one ingredient, like I mentioned the cake before, one ingredient combined with the administrator's own individual personality to try to use the opportunity of a circle to bring some type of closure and some type of respect to the people who are involved in that type of circle. So it's not just circles, there's mediation and community court and conferencing, but it requires those involved to use it as a starting point and not as an ending point. Otherwise, you just become essentially just another cog in a machine that's not going to create any type of effective change. Joni?
Yeah, and I just want to add, when there's a training, everything's going to come down to the follow through. So when you have the training, how are you applying it? How are you having those discussions of that application? What's working? What's not working? What needs to be tweaked to the individual situation? And then what is the reinforcer is the successful outcomes. So when you see that the training application is being successful with the tweaking, and that has to come from the communication. Why don't they think that it's helpful? What can we do about it? It all comes back to that. And then it will be reinforced with those successful outcomes.
And I think it's important to, just even in the buy-in of it all and reminding people about the importance of it and, how it will benefit the children, and making sure that, we aren't isolating different parts of the practice, right? But just doing the practice as a whole, the way it's intended to be done. Thank you so much for responding to the question. So this question came up for Felicia. What are potential ramifications of including the criminal justice system when addressing bullying?
All right, so one of the reasons I wrote my book, Ice Queen, was to make the public, especially children, aware of the potential problems of their cyber behaviors so that they would not end up in the criminal justice system. Because then the ramifications are you lose complete control of your future. So instead of, we're all mediators from New Jersey Association of Professional Mediators, we like to work everything out. We like to have, the best possible outcome without having anything extreme imposed upon us by a court of law. In this case, it would be the criminal justice system. So behaviors like sexting of even amongst consensual minors are illegal. It's considered under our laws to be child pornography. So if the parents and the schools don't deal with it, then children end up getting prosecutors as adult child pedophiles. So, you know, the reason these laws exist is to prevent against child sexual exploitation. And then our laws don't have a carve out right now for these behaviors. So children just get scooped up and treated as criminals. And even if they come to school and ask for nude photos under our laws, that's considered luring, enticement of enticing underage minors. So those are crimes too. You're violating our invasion of privacy statutes. So kids don't realize that their regular behaviors are criminal. And we as parents want to do everything we can to try and educate our children, teach them about being responsible digital citizens, and give them guidelines that they don't have online that we give them in other areas of their life. We would teach them not to go to the mall and talk to strangers, or go to the park and, you know, get into some, you know, be asked to go into somebody's car. You know, we teach them safety, but online, most parents, educators, we don't know what they're doing. So they don't have guidelines, and they don't know that if they get into trouble, that there's a safe, supportive, unconditional support and non-judgmental environment in the way of the schools and hopefully in their households that they can go to get them out. So I know, very long answer. It's a complex question.
No, that was helpful. Thank you. You know, I was just thinking about something that I saw, you know, not too long ago where, you know, somebody had sent someone a picture and that person was upset at them for whatever reason. And then they shared that picture with, I can't even remember how many of their peers. Well, they received a count for every person that they shared that photo with. And, you know, the kids don't realize that sometimes what they're doing is really putting a huge hindrance on their future by doing, you know, some of these things because they want to get it back at somebody, or maybe they're mad at somebody or whatever. They don't really understand sometimes the totality of what they're doing and the legal ramifications for them and their parents.
That's
Dr.
correct.
Collins,
Oh, yes, Joni.
I just wanted to add, you know, about trauma. So, you know, we have the trauma-informed restorative justice, and that's really taking the principles of the restorative justice and then understanding a trauma incident. And, you know, cyberbullying is traumatic. The event at hand is traumatic, but people come with their own trauma, and those traumas are something that can get triggered at any time. So it's important to just take a moment to talk about that, because a person who is traumatized may avoid person, places, and things. There may be something that's called transference, where, you know, a particular person, just by the way they look or they sound or something in the environment, a smell, may trigger a trauma response. A person could having flashbacks at any time, nightmares, sleep disturbances, which can, you know, cause a lot of other things. But there can be some intense emotions behind this, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, whether it's guilt, whether it's shame, whether it's sadness. But it's very important to look for changes in an individual. So if somebody is talking about a specific topic and they start to get fidgety, or one of the number one things that I see is that their eyes start to tear up. What is very important is not to push the issue. So if a person wants to, you know, freely talk about something because you're saying, hey, I noticed that, you know, you seem to, you know, be getting a little bit, you know, teary-eyed. Is there something that you'd like to talk about? If they don't want to talk about it, it's not the time and place, because 1 out of 4 individuals do have mental health challenges, and that doesn't include the people who are not diagnosed. So you don't know what an individual response can be, and you can set somebody really off into a severe, you know, panic attack. You know, we have to see that, you know, changes in a person might also, you know, be that they become distracted in their own thoughts. So they become detached. They can even become physically ill. So all those somatic symptoms may come out, and you may be dealing with people that have ineffective coping with alcohol and drugs. So the one takeaway, you know, in this limited time is when somebody is having a trauma response is don't push it, because you don't know what the result is, and utilize the school resources, utilize your school psychologists, your school counselors. And I just wanted to add that in because this can result in a lot of trauma.
And Dr. Pollins, this point is really critical because in the pilot program itself that 14 school districts are involved with, and hopefully will spread to more, it very expressly, if you read the pilot program specs, it focuses on trauma-informed restorative justice practices in the public schools. The trauma-informed approach is a necessary ingredient in the whole focus of the program. Again, it's in everybody's materials. It even goes to define a trauma-informed approach, an approach that recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in students, families, staff, and others, and which responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into school policies, procedures, and practices for the purposes of promoting what? Resiliency and healing, resisting the recurrence of trauma, and improving educational outcomes. So there needs, when there's a focus on restorative justice, there has to be a focus at the same time on trauma and recognizing how that all fits into the puzzle that brings everybody into a restorative justice forum.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing that up and adding that to the conversation, because it is really important. You know, we don't know all the time what our students are coming to school with and the trauma that they've, you know, experienced and how they are reacting to things that have happened to them. So we need to be in tune to what those signs and what those symptoms look like, so we could be, you know, sensitive to their needs. And this is why I always say it's also important for us to identify and help students identify, at least in the building, one person who is their person, whether it's the school psychologist, whether it's another teacher. You know, it doesn't even have to be a teacher of the grade that they're in. It could have been a teacher that they built a relationship with on the playground who does recess duty or during after school care, or a teacher that they've had before, that they know that they can, you know, feel safe with in talking about any issues that they may be having. So thank you for bringing that up. We have one final question, and this question is for our good Dr. Ken Neumann. How can schools and especially administrators be proactive against bullying? And I'll share before he does a little bit of what I did last year. Was I remember being a building principal, and after recess, everybody came in with like 10,000 issues and things that had happened. And last year, what I did was I did a huge training for lunch aides, just to, you know, have them understand how to have kids interact on the, you know, playground, how to intervene when they see, you know, different behaviors, how the importance of reporting the behaviors, regardless of how busy things get. So we could, you know, work to mitigate these issues, you know, when they're in the moment that they're happening, and empowering them to be able to do that, because the lunch aides are the ones for the most part, you know, in our district, who are with the kids during recess. And of course, that looks differently if you're the people who monitor recess, or, you know, are your teachers. But I just wanted to share that. But Ken, please.
When you said lunch aides, I said, wow, these are the people who should be best trained in a school to deal with bullying, because I remember it's a long time ago since I was in a lunchroom as a student, but certainly I remember what was going on then. I think that it's awareness, it's education, it's training. I can't picture us getting to a day when we're going to have enough training. I think lunch aid training should be mandatory in every district. If you're going to train anyone, it should be the lunch aides, the people who are on the playground during recess, and in the lunchroom itself. There's a lot of bullying in the lunchroom, and people just don't pay attention to it. The kids go to the lunchroom, all right, just, you know, everyone gets a break while everyone eats lunch. That's not what happens, obviously. It's education and training, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate that. All right, we are coming up on time. Although we have one more question that looks like popped in for Marv, which kind of was in tandem with the question that was asked of Anju earlier. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Marv, to any activities that you can think of or that you would want to share in regards to how we reveal our own cultural gaps or our own biases that could be helpful to our participants.
Yeah, I think Anju gave the answer I would have given. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
What I want to do is I just want to thank everyone for being engaged and wanting to hear more about this topic and logging on today, because this really is important, because this work really does affect, you know, all of the students that we work with and the experience that they have in the academic setting and how they're developing, you know, as, you know, social and emotional and academic humans. So we hope that these are conversations that you all continue to have in your workplaces. We hope that these are some things have come up in our conversation today that you will start thinking about in your own reflection of practice. Like I said, you know, I want to do a lot more reflection for myself just on the root causes of some of the behaviors that we're seeing, to think about, you know, how we, you know, get through to the end of the school year and also be proactive in thinking about what kinds of things that I even heard from today that we can start implementing for the school year next year in regards to training and making sure that all of the adults who are working with students are, you know, starting out on equal footing to make sure that, you know, we are meeting a need. And then how do we outstretch that to the community? And of course, forums like these are one way that we can be able to do that. But I want to see if there was any aha moment, any takeaway that any of you all have from the session today. And if so, it would be great if you could just put your aha moment in the chat, your one takeaway in the chat, because our presenters, I'm sure, would love to see that. Sarah put in a most important note: a professional development certificate will also be shared with you all, because we know how important that is as well. As long as the materials, I believe it was also shared in the chat, will be sent to you all via email. Now, we would never be able to close out this session without giving a huge thank you to Dr. Adara Goldberg and Sarah Kuykendall for helping us and working with us to make sure that this session happened today. And I just wanted to open the floor to see if they wanted to say anything on the tail end of the 3 minutes that we have with you all. But so excited that, you know, these two organizations were able to come together and create this session of extreme importance for you all this morning. Sarah or Adara?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Pollins. Thank you to all the speakers today. And we just want to acknowledge, you know, from the Diversity Council, our appreciation for all of you that have come out this morning. We know that everybody has intensive roles, your responsibilities are never ending, and we appreciate you taking the time to come and learn with us. As we posted in the chat, all of the resources from today's session will be shared via email, as well as the Zoom recording. And for those of you who have been asking about restorative justice practices, my recommendation is please feel free to utilize, I put a link to a digital collection that has been produced by the Restorative Justice in Education grant funded by the NJDOE. And this is something that is also run through our office. And so we are happy to have all of you interact with that as much as you would like. Feel free to share that. It is a public document intended to be utilized. I have also placed within the chat the newsletter of upcoming restorative justice events. These are all virtual, and there is no cost ever to any educators who wish to participate. And this is something folks are talking about: training lunch aides and, you know, classroom assistants. Everybody is welcome at these trainings. Anything that we do is intended to support folks who are working within schools and with students. And this is not limited, as we all know, you know, to teachers and administrators. So please do utilize these resources. If you have questions about restorative practices, questions about today's session, or further training and resource opportunities, please do not hesitate to email me. I am putting my email information in the chat again. And as always, we are here, you know, to support you in your schools. So please do not ever hesitate to reach out to us. And we hope to see everybody soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
One quick thing I want to add as well is that March 3rd is our middle and elementary school leadership conference. So if you are an administrator in an elementary or middle school, or if you want to share this with your colleagues, we do encourage you to have your staff bring a group of students to the conference. Our keynote this year is Aaron Goodman. Aaron Goodman is the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, Tova Friedman, and together they created a TikTok platform with more than 8.7 million views. So Aaron will be coming on to share about his experience using social media for a positive change. So if you would like to see your students come to this conference, please email myself or Dr. Goldberg. We're happy to have your students join us. It's a very quick Google form registration, and then it'll be on Zoom that day. So students don't have to leave. They can just, come from their own devices or a shared setting, and they're more than welcome to join. So thank you very much for allowing me to add that. And I appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you so much.
And I've added that flyer into the chat for anyone who's interested. We will also share that with the follow-up resources.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. We hope you have a great rest of the day. If all of the presenters could just stay on for a quick 30 seconds afterwards. Thank you so much again to all of our participants for attending. We appreciate you.